Time for an in-depth chat with a very deep individual, Geoff Macpherson from Grace Theological College. G'day, mate.
Morning, it.
Now, good morning, Geoff. We're going to tackle a rather interesting topic this morning, the topic of women in leadership, and the question, should women be allowed in church leadership? So what are your thoughts around this controversial topic?
It's kind of a perennial topic too, isn't it? Pops up every now and then.
Yeah. And it's a great, as I was thinking about this, I thought this is a great kind of topic to practice a kind of a theological method on, because whenever we come to a topic like this or any topic, we kind of come to the Bible with our traditions, we come with our sort of backgrounds, we come with our culture, we come with our experiences, and then we try to make sense of it with our minds, like we're using reason and logic and all that. And so, like as I say to students, there's tradition, there's logic, there's experience, but the Bible has to be king or queen, in any kind of theological topic. We use all these other things, but it's the Bible really that we have to go to.
Okay. Well, what does the Bible say about this specifically?
Great question. Yeah.
Nice work, Kat. Head of the class.
So I when we read the Bible, I think really clearly teaches that gender is a biological reality. God has made us male and female in his image and in his likeness. God isn't male or female, but he's made us that way. And it appears that in the Bible, God has designed us to function with equality and unity, but also in diversity. And I think we see that, we see how that plays out in creation. When you look at the Genesis account of how Adam is created and then the woman is created, or Eve is created. And then it seems to be applied particularly in the home, and that men and women thrive in a way that God has intended, with our masculinity and our femininity, but putting aside all the cultural baggage about masculinity and, femininity. God has made us different by design, I think.
I think that's a great place to start from too. I remember hearing some, it was more actually just some secular people discussing this in broad terms as well, and saying when it came to discussions around men and women, for them they said, look, anything that pits men against women or women against men is ultimately, it's a self-destructive thing. If nothing else, surely we could agree we're better when we compliment and look for the good of the other gender, as opposed to seeing them as maybe a threat or in opposition to us.
Totally. And I think we're at a sort of a point in society when there's a bit of that happening, You take theory of sports, for example. We do have men's and women's sports that we do segregate them, and we do separate them for very good reasons.
And a study recently showed that there's about 2,000 biological differences between male and female, like in the physiology. So when it comes to sporting performance, with 2,000 differences, there's potentially 2,000 advantages. So it would seem almost unfair to try and pit a male body biologically against a female body. But that's another topic entirely. Let's talk about women in leadership. And So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this one. This is where it gets a bit more controversial. So, when you go through the Old Testament, it appears that, your judges, your priests, and your prophets were men, with some notable exceptions, your Deborahs and so on. And unfortunately, of course, in the Greco-Roman world and in Judaism at that time, women were not treated, I would say, biblically. Rabbis, for example, would say that a woman really couldn't learn, but really they only caused sexual temptation to men. And so the way that Jesus treated women was actually revolutionary. He taught Mary and Martha. Remember that little controversy there? Like, hey, Mary should be in the kitchen helping me, says Martha. And also talking to the Samaritan woman at the well. Again, that was a really shocking thing that Jesus did. But I would say, though, that Jesus didn't actually change that creational mandate or that difference in design that God has made for men and women. It's interesting that you mentioned that too, because women were the first witnesses on scene as well to the resurrection, which showed that they played a massive role in the gospel message.
Totally. And what was controversial about that was, of course, in rabbinic law, that the testimony of a woman was only worth half of that of a man. So it was actually quite a controversy, that God ordained that this would happen.
Good thing there were two women then, because two halves make one whole.
Yeah. So, but I don't believe that Jesus actually changes that creational mandate. And so, in the New Testament, the apostles are men, and Paul does talk to Timothy and Titus about appointing elders in the new churches. And he describes the kind of men that the churches should be looking for. And then he has, most, you might say, controversy for today. 1 Timothy 2:12, he says, I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. And that has been the sort of, the big debate for today.
I mean, that's the moment where I'm like, do you turn my mic off and I just leave the building? So what do you think is going on
that's the question.
historically in that context for him to say something like that? Because I know that there's been a lot of discussions around what might have been happening in the early church.
Yeah, that's right. And so that the discussion then comes down to, was Paul actually speaking about a particular situation in that church then, or was he giving a sort of a blanket rule, or you might say a principle that the church from then on or at all times should operate on? My personal view is that my understanding of the Bible, at least, is that God does, call men to that position of leadership in the church, authoritative leading and teaching. However, I'm not saying that doesn't, and you do not turn your microphone off, Kat, because that doesn't
Thank you.
exclude. Yes, that's right. And so I don't believe it is actually saying, excludes women from having any voice or any kind of role in the church either.
Well, that's the thing, because you've got to look at the Bible as a whole, right? And I'm reminded immediately of Proverbs 31, which reads in verse 14, talking about the ideal woman or the ideal wife. She is like a merchant ship bringing her food in from afar. It goes on to say, she provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable and her lamp does not go out at night. It talks about this woman that's clearly in a leadership role, that is negotiating, that is holding the household up. And that is not the kind of woman that you would imagine would just be quiet and step back and be silent and not be involved, right?
Yeah, and totally. I mean, so one of the discussions is around, is this extended beyond the church and the family? Like, does the Bible address husband-wife roles in particular, and then within the church? And does it extend beyond that into wider society?
There you go. Sorry.
That's the thing. He turned my mic off. Are you trying to make a point here about
right?
women speaking in public?
Of
all the times to keep my mic off, he chooses now. Interesting. Well, look, we can't answer all the world's questions around this, but we can tackle into a few or dive into a few topics. So let's talk about women in leadership in the broader context. So what does the Bible indicate around women when it comes to their leadership, when it comes to economics and teaching and
what about
politics?
running a business, or what about being the Prime Minister, for example?
Yeah.
Or what about being the Queen?
Yeah.
Look, again, I think when you go back into the scriptures and, you see that God does raise up women. Kat, you referenced the Proverbs, the woman of Proverbs before. She's a formidable lady, a businesswoman. You read about Lydia, who Paul and them meet, and so look, it appears to me that the Bible kind of does highlight the home and the church, where he really wants those role distinctions to be seen, and I think across society in general, it happens anyway. Like, as we've already referenced, sports and women's spaces and things like that. But I don't see any biblical kind of guidance in terms of the roles of women in places of leadership, say in government or medicine or whatever it is, or in the university, in any of those kinds of contexts. And I think that, again, as long as we play to the strengths of how God has designed us and made us, and I think we can do that without sort of obliterating without feeling like a woman has to behave like a man. I think this has been one of the challenges, or maybe vice versa. I don't know. To hold a position in a social context.
That's a different subject entirely, like the whole masculinity, femininity. And I was in a lecture once that talked about the fact that the Bible doesn't actually depict what masculinity is and what femininity is. There isn't real clear descriptions of that in the Bible, because you've got men like David who were, warriors and kings, but also played the harp and sang songs and danced around before the Lord. So there's a whole lot of stuff in the Bible that you could go into a lot deeper dive into. But in terms of what you mentioned about like women being raised up in the world, what I get a sense of is that God has given us each as human beings gifts and talents. And for us to be effective in the mission that he's given us, that we are to effectively use them. And that could be in the field of medicine, that could be in the field of teaching, that could be in the field of economics, whatever our gift and talents and the things that we're enthusiastic about, God's placed in us for a reason.
Yeah. And so we're, coming back to the beginning again, we're equally image bearers. God made us male and female for a reason. And I just go back to, as a child listening to, stories that my mum would read, about pioneer missionaries and these amazing women who would go out onto the mission field and do all of these things. Many listeners would have heard of a woman called Colleen Reddit, who's been in India and done this incredible work, come from New Zealand. So, I think using the gifts, celebrating the way that God has designed us and made us, and saying that, gender is part of God's design, but that together, men and women, we can bless the church. We can also bless the society by just acknowledging that, not having to hide it, but using it.
I often look at, say, the way that workplace conversations have changed in the last, say, 50 or 60 years in particular, that women have been more involved outside of the home there. And you see, for example, discussions around things like, say, work-life balance, for example, which to me is a contribution that women have made to the working space that otherwise, let's be honest, guys are much more of a past era, much more about, no, I go to work and I just do the work stuff, and guys will, slave away at that kind of thing and not think about what their wider contributions to the family might be, how much the kids might need their father present with them.
And how much they might miss out on by not actually having that downtime with their whānau.
Yeah. So, I think it's a great example of what you're saying, Geoff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Geoff Macpherson from Grace Theological College, thank you so much for joining us today.
God bless you guys.